Good evening, Quintus Curtius here. It's been a while since our last podcast, so I just wanted to check in with everybody here and just get a podcast out just to talk about something that I just thought of today. And the title of this podcast is going to be "Things Are Not As Bad as You Think, but Different from What You Think." Not as bad as you think, but different from what you think. Well, what does that mean? Well, I started to think about this day. I did something that I sometimes do, not as much now as I used to in years past, but I went into a movie theater, just walked in. As you may know, I'm a big fan of movies, and I used to like to kind of surprise myself, just kind of walk in on a weekend and just see whatever is playing at that time that looks good. I haven't done it in a while, but I did it today. And I ended up sitting down inside a movie called, one of these low-budget horror movies called Barbarian. Barbarian, which came out this year, 2022. I think it was directed by, let's see, who is it? Zach Cregger. And, this movie had gotten some pretty decent reviews. I didn't know it at the time, but when I came back to the house, I checked it out. It got like a 92% positivity rating on Rotten Tomatoes. I didn't know this at the time, but it looked like kind of a throwback 70s low budget horror movie. Looked pretty decent. So I went in and saw it, and I was just, as about halfway through it, I said, this is just not working, man. This is just no good. This movie is terrible. And it had some pretty interesting twists and turns in it, but all in all, man, I just think it was just one of these really experimental, and when I say experimental, I mean like a student at a film school, like a first movie experiment. It just did not have really any professional qualities to it. Every actor in it was a no-name nobody, and it just seemed really derivative. The scares and the shocks were things that you've already seen before. So halfway through, I'm seeing this. All right, am I going to be able to finish this without getting up and leaving? And so I gutted it out, and I stayed, and it just, it ended. Let's just put it that way. It was over. And I'm walking out of the theater, and I'm saying to myself, you know what? This is just this is just really not good. Kind of pissed off. But as I got in the car and I drove back, you start to sort of these movies start to marinate in your head, and you start to think about them, and it's just like, all right, well, maybe it wasn't that bad. I mean, maybe it was not exactly what I expected, but maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Maybe it was just something that you just take it with a grain of salt. And, so when I got back home, I looked at it up on Rotten Tomatoes and saw that it had like a 92%. I was surprised. It made me wonder about some of these reviews, if the people that are reviewing these movies are on the take, or if there's some sort of cozy arrangement between writers and these movie producers and distributors. I still think there is in some ways. I think this goes on a lot more than you think. But anyway, I started to just maybe soften my attitude towards this movie. And I said, look, this may not be the greatest thing, may not even really be that great, but it wasn't that bad. It was just a nothing disposable Sunday afternoon flick that you might see. And, maybe give these guys some credit. It's hard enough now to get anything out there, anything creative. It's hard to do. Maybe give this individual some credit. He put together something that was at least creative, in an era where every single movie now is a knockoff of a Marvel this, Marvel that, sequels, double sequels, triple sequels. I mean, hell, I saw as a coming attraction preview, they're still doing Halloween movies now. There was like Halloween Ends with Jamie Lee Curtis. This is 2022. Did you know the first Halloween movie came out in 1978? 1978, so that's what, 40 years? We're dealing with Halloween. I mean, come on, people. Get some. Where are the new ideas? So anyway, the point is that my attitude softened a little bit, and this kind of made me think of a rule of thumb, if you want to call it that I've often seen in my life in many different ways that I thought I might share with you, and that things are not always as bad as you think they are, or things are not going to be as bad as you predict them to be, but they'll be a little bit different from what you predict them to be. And I've often found this to be true in events when you're worried, and this is especially true when you're worried about something, because we all worry about things. We all stress about the unknown. We all wonder what's going to happen with this, what's going to happen with that. I'm really worried. I can't believe this is happening, blah, 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 blah. And then when you finally go through the event, you say to yourself after it was over, you say, that really wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. It ended up differently, and it was different than what I anticipated, but it was not as bad as what I thought. And so I think this is a principle that we have to kind of keep close to our hearts as we go through life, or at least I've tried to do this, that whenever you feel like you're stressing out about something, whenever you feel like you're feeling a lot of concern or apprehension about something, whether it's politics or current events or conflicts in the job or the family or with your loved ones, realize that things are never really as bad as they appear to be. The mind has a way of warping our sensibilities. The mind has a way of accentuating the bad and maybe repressing the good. And sometimes the opposite is true. Sometimes things are never as good as we think they are. Say maybe some people have personalities that are predisposed to undue optimism. And sometimes that also needs to be mollified, and that needs to be put in check as well. But then after we actually go through the event, after we finish the conflict, or after we work our way through the thing that we're worried about, we say to ourselves, boy, that really wasn't that bad. It was different. It ended up differently. And I think that's I think this is important, because I think this is an important component of sort of having an optimistic mentality in life. Because you almost have to be an optimist. I mean, I don't think you need to be a delusional optimist. I did not say that. But I think you can't just consign yourself to an oblivion of negativity, because there's no end when you do that. But I think it's important to have this principle close to your heart, which is no matter how bad things look, they may end up not as good or as bad as you think they are, but they're going to end up differently than the way you think. It's almost like there's this sort of weird, fusion of good energy and bad energy, and things somehow cancel each other out, and you end up in a place very different from where you expected to end up. Maybe I'll have to work on that analogy, but you get the idea. You understand what I'm saying. So, that's something I think is important. I think it's important to keep that in mind whenever you are in a worrisome or apprehensive situation. You need to just tell yourself and say to yourself, look, my mind is making this out to be worse than it really is. Things are not as bad as they appear to be. And even though this may not end up as good as I think as it will end, it's going to end up in a different way than the negative way that my mind is telling me, and I will deal with that situation. It'll be a different ending than you anticipate, but you will handle the new ending. You will handle it. So that's the principle. Things are not as bad as you think, but they're going to end up differently than what you think. And the final analysis, the final lesson here is that you will handle it. You will deal with that new situation that has been created. So just keep that in mind. The brain has a way of tricking you almost into making you think that things are really awful and bad, when even though they may not be great, they're certainly not as despairing and as desperate as you might think. So keep that in mind. All right. I'm Quintus Curtius. Good night.